Hey everybody, this is Joel Runyon with Impossible. Today I'm doing a reaction video to Joe Rogan and Bret Weinstein. I got that right actually. Look that up on how to pronounce it. They're talking about mewing. Now, mewing is a technique that I've talked about on our mobility site, MoveWell. It's a facial posture technique. I think in this clip they actually reference one of the diagrams and articles that we wrote, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, they're going to be talking about this, and I'll just have posted a mewing video right before this. So if you want to know more about mewing, go watch that video. And yeah, let's get into it.
So we should be looking at the root cause of these things. And although those of us who have these sensitivities can't do anything about them except avoid the things that trigger us, those who are young and don't yet have these sensitivities, we can protect them. But we have to understand that this is not, just as we are told that, the epidemic of children's teeth not meeting correctly in their jaws and needing to be moved around by orthodontists is the result of bad genes. That's nonsense. That doesn't make a.
So we're going to get into it right now. This is kind of like the core of the thesis behind mewing, and he's just going to probably just tell us exactly that.
Bit of sense. Right? It can't be bad genes, right? It's too rapidly progressing. Something else.
And look at skulls of people from pre-industrial revolution, and you don't have malocclusion. You don't have people with jaws and teeth that look like our modern jaws.
They think it has something to do with soft food, right?
Right.
Exactly.
So I believe Mike Mew, who I actually had on my
There you go.
podcast. Yeah, Mewing, exactly. Mike Mew, I think, has cracked the case, but you should also look at what has happened.
Can you explain to people what...
Yeah.
So really quick, one of the interesting things about the thesis here is that they're just talking about if you have soft food, your jaw is not going to be strong because you're not using it. And that's pretty much like any other muscle in your body. You don't use it, you're not going to stress it, doesn't give it time to recover, you're not going to build any strength, and then everything just kind of sifts in.
Dr. Mew, who is actually second generation on this topic, his father, I think John Mew, first started to innovate the study of the interrelationship between diet and the development of our jaws. And what John and Mike Mew have discovered is that because we have effectively made the diet for very young children very soft, that what we have done is caused a collapsing of the palate. So effectively, what we don't intuit is that it's not that our genes describe a skull shape that we then get and are stuck with. Our skull shape is dynamic, and that skull shape is responsive to the forces that you put on it, right? Just like you can make muscles larger by stressing them. Your jaw responds to what you chew on as a baby. And if it ends up chewing on things that are too soft, it gets narrow, which creates a large number of pathologies that actually have nothing to do with teeth. But what we all come to understand is,
would be really interesting to know the numbers of people who have like different sizes of jaws over the year. I think there's probably an illustration somewhere, but that would be really interesting to see.
Jaw isn't big enough for my teeth. Maybe my wisdom teeth need to be pulled out because there's not enough room for them. That should set off alarm bells. You have a jaw that doesn't have room for teeth. Selection doesn't work that way, right? If your jaw wasn't big enough for your teeth...
Sorry, that was funny. That was really funny. Your jaw doesn't have room for teeth. That's a good line.
Selection would have eliminated the teeth, or it would have made the jaw bigger. The fact that something has got these things mismatched tells you you're doing something. There's something novel in your environment that's causing this, and in this case it appears to be the change in diet that we have inflicted on very young children, which also, the good news is, that means if you stop doing that, you can stop harming these kids. They won't need to go to the orthodontist. But the punchline of the story is that Mike Mew is in danger of being driven out of orthodontia because his heterodox view of malocclusion is at odds with the central narrative around which all of orthodontia is based.
Does he have clear evidence that his methods work?
Yes.
I've only seen it discussed online. I'm pretty ignorant about the method. It has to do with something like pressing your tongue against your palate. And
I like how Joe always says, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And then he goes on and describes pretty much exactly whatever he's talking about. Like, this guy has the widest range of knowledge and says he never knows anything about anything. But he seems to always know exactly what he's talking about.
eating like beef jerky or something?
Well, there are two things. One,
Chewing gum.
Here, okay, here.
Yeah, pressing your tongue to your top of your mouth and eating beef jerky. That's the point.
Here it goes. Keep your mouth
Yeah, this
closed
is actually an
and your
article. This
teeth
is dope.
Gently touching, and move your tongue to the roof of your mouth and lightly press. Your tongue is resting at the top of your mouth. Be sure to not block your airway as you breathe. So you're supposed to
Made by MoveWell. So also, I think we're supposed to eat beef jerky, according to Joe.
do that and breathe.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
and this is a response to not having had sort of.
So basically what you're doing is you're taking your tongue, putting it to the top of roof of your mouth, and you're just kind of pressing upwards. And then you're just kind of like breathing through your nose and becoming a nose breather, not a mouth breather.
The right developmental environment in the beginning.
Oh, look
right?
at all these results.
Yeah, so
Oh,
like,
look
you
at
know,
that lady's jaw. That's crazy.
babies who are breastfed and who are then given hard things to chew on and who aren't given binkies or pacifiers, whatever you want to call them.
What's funny is that they're actually talking about this in the context of like jaw shapes, and specifically in relation to the teeth. But a lot of the people in the mewing community are doing it for facial, like jaw structure, like changing to have a better looking jaw. And then the other things that come out are around breathing as well.
Don't tend to need this, right? But if you were given an artificial nipple to suck on a lot as a kid and you were only given basically very soft food for a long time, there's a good chance that your jaw is smaller and less
Actually, sorry.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, actually, I feel like this is the right moment to talk about hyenas.
Look at this lady.
Left turn?
Like, that is crazy. Is that real?
Yes.
Yeah.
She had
that
like
is
this little tiny ass jaw, and then she developed a real normal
Yeah,
one.
because I mean, we know that muscles grow with use, right? We don't feel
This is what I was talking
like
about earlier.
bones do. Why? Because they're like hard. They seem like once your bones are what they are, they're just going to stay what they are and where they are. But here's an example from hyenas. Wild hyenas. So hyenas eat meat, and they have big ass sagittal crests on top of their heads, by which the muscles, the masseter, is attached, and that allows them to shear meat with their teeth. Hyenas raised in captivity actually do not develop those sagittal crests, and therefore they do not end up with the big masseter muscles, and they end up basically unable to do the kinds of meat eating that wild hyenas do. All it takes is a different developmental environment, and you have literally different bone development in what is basically equivalent genetic starting points. So, you know, part of what we're talking about here is, yes, obviously genetics is real, genes are real, but of all the species on the planet, we humans are the most flexible. We're the most software when we're born, and even other animals like hyenas, which are, mostly driven by their genes. All you have to do is give them a different environment early on in their life, and they actually don't even look like wild hyenas anymore.
What's super interesting about this in general is that I think typically people would call this gene expression. Mark Sisson talks about this a lot. It's like everybody likes to think that you are kind of stuck with whatever your DNA is, but really your environmental factors and the stressors that you pick out and choose to engage with have a lot to say about how those genes actually become expressed. So you might have really crappy genes, but you could still get the most out of those genes that you possibly can. And so it's all about the environments that you're choosing to put yourself in. And yeah, if you got really crappy genes, you might be, lower overall potential, but you can still kind of maximize that potential.
Their skulls don't have those sagittal crests, and they can't do what hyenas do.
So I want to make 2 points about this. One, it is interesting to find an entire field, orthodontia, telling one story, and then a couple of renegades saying that story isn't right, and here is my track record of fixing people who have an obvious pathology, right? It would seem like it doesn't make any sense to bet on the couple of renegades. The problem, though, I knew that there was no defense for the orthodontic explanation for malocclusion. It has never made sense to me that there's suddenly an epidemic of bad genes that is causing our teeth not to fit in our jaws. I didn't know what the explanation for this change was, but I knew it was going to have to do with novelty. Mike Mew has done an excellent job not only figuring out what's causing this and how to treat it, but he's also done the work anthropologically. He's gone through the anthropological record and made the case, and it is rock solid. It is evolutionarily totally coherent, and he has looked at a comparison with other animals. Also, his argument is evolutionarily coherent. So with the evolutionary toolkit, you can look and you can say, look, I don't care how many orthodontists are saying that Mike Mew is crazy. He's saying something coherent, and they aren't.
Exactly.
Right?
Science is not done by consensus. It's not a democracy. It's not majority rule.
Right.
It's, there's an underlying reality. Sorry, you may like it, you may not, but it is what it is.
Right. He may not be, I'm sure there's imprecision in what he's saying. There must be little things that aren't quite right. But overarchingly, he's saying something that makes sense. It adds up, and evolutionarily adding up is something it must do. And if you think about what you also know, you can tell that our sense of, like, the genes give you a shape of your skull can't possibly be right.
The funny thing about mewing in general is that it's controversial, but it's not really a big downside. You're just sticking your tongue to the roof of your mouth. If worst case scenario, it doesn't work, you're just kind of like doing something stupid for 30 days. Like, you're not spending money, you're not wasting time. Like, you're wasting time. You're definitely wasting time. But you're not like scamming people out of money. So I don't really get, other than like the fact that you're putting orthodontia out of business, why. I guess that's a big deal. But yeah, like, people think this is super controversial. If it doesn't work, like, it doesn't work. But like, you can do it for 30 days and it's not gonna really affect your life in a negative way. Not medical advice.
Because your genes are a composite of two people's half genome, right? You can put any two people together and you can get a coherent skull. That means that the genes can't describe a blueprint for a skull. What they do is they describe rules by which a skull that makes sense emerges, right? It's a feedback with the environment. And this is true because...
Yeah, again, not a blueprint, but a starting place and sort of very loose instructions.
It's instructions that
feedback.
cause things to work. And actually, Heather can describe... I want to come back to the skull thing, but Heather can describe... she did these laboratories in which people would dissect animals, and so there would be, 20 versions of an animal open on the tables at the same time. And you would think there's a description of, this artery goes from this starting point to this end point through this path. But that ain't so.
Yeah, so, I taught comparative anatomy as part of what I did, and
What's cool about that, again, about gene expression, you actually it's really freeing that you get a lot of control over what your final destiny is. It really sucks to think, like, hey, I got crappy genetics and I'm screwed. But when you realize they're like what is the term? It's they're more like guidelines, than hard and fast rules. Then it gives you a lot of room to actually take personal agency and work on yourself.
Comparative anatomy refers to comparison between two species. So we had sharks and we had cats, and every pair of students had a shark that they were dissecting over the course of 10 weeks. And
she's really got a lot of animal analogies here.
And what we were supposedly doing, again, was going, okay, jaws in sharks, jaws in cats, homologous to one another, but look at how many different muscle groups there are in cats, etc. But for me, exactly as Bret says, some of the most interesting insights that we had were on a day when we only had the cats out, say. We would go around and look at everyone's cats, so, a room with 13 cats in it or so, and say, okay, what doesn't vary? Is there always a femur? Are there always two femurs in a cat? Yes, there are. Are they always the same length relative to the tibia and fibula? No, not necessarily, but they're always in the same orientation. Are the muscles always attached to the same places? Yes. Are they always the same size? No. Okay, that's not that surprising. But things like circulatory structures were wildly variable. And so, even the shape of the aortic arch, which is super important, it's the first branch off the heart.
All right, we're kind of getting out of mewing. I'm going to watch for a little more and see what happens, but we might just skip the rest of this.
Would sometimes have another branch off of it very soon. Sometimes it would take a while. And these were all functional cats that were euthanized, late in life. These weren't cats that died because they had improper aortic arches. So the point is, there's so much diversity, even in something as important as the aortic arch, that is actually functional. And that tells us, okay, as long as, with regard to blood, as long as it gets where it's going, it's probably going to be okay. And there's going to be people with better and people with worse, cats with better, cats with worse. And not so much with a femur. If your femur is not actually in your hip socket, it's not going to do a functional job as a femur. But
Femurs are important.
If one of the arteries or veins that's running alongside your femur takes a slightly more circuitous route, you might be a little less efficient. You might not be the marathon runner,
Right.
But you're probably going to be okay. So just the amount of variation that's possible, and that's actually not just possible but normal in a healthy functioning population of humans or other animals, is extraordinary.
Which implies that what's in the genes is a rule rather than a description of a structure, right? The rule causes the blood vessel to find its target, and it may travel an unusual route based on some parameter of development. But the way to really see it is to think about domestic dogs. Right, the variance within that one species is
More animal analogies,
gigantic, and you can mate any two of them.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can mate, a Great Dane and a toy poodle or something, right, and the developmental program can figure out how to do that, right, which it can. The way it's going to do that is not based on the fact that it has, a design of a large dog and a small dog, and it has some calculator that figures out how to average them or something. It's going to be based on rules, and those rules actually have to be set so that they do not kill the mother, right? If you have a small dog gestating a large, fetus, that's not going to work. So the whole thing has to be rule-based, which we see actually across all complex creatures, including plants. You may have seen descriptions of Fibonacci sequences, these mathematical sequences in the shapes of plants. And you think, oh, Fibonacci sequences are written into the genome. But they're not. What's written into the genome is a rule that says place the next leaf at the place where the concentration of two hormones from the last couple of leaves is at lowest concentration. Why? Because it tends to get the leaves out of the way of the shade of the leaves that are already there. And if you think about what leaves do, they work best when they're not in the shade. And so what you have is a rule that's so simple and so good that if you reorganize the plant, it will still put the leaves in the right place. You can come up with a totally new shape of the plant and a rule that says, put this next leaf where it doesn't detect the last couple of leaves at a high rate. That will move it to the optimal position, and you'll be able to basically stretch and pull and reorganize the plant and get something coherent, which is the same for dogs. And it implies, again, about our skulls, that our skulls are really a dynamic system, and what we've done is given them bad info that results in...
Okay, we're back to mewing. Look at that.
But we could just simply stop doing that. Right? We could figure out what the good information is. We could let children gnaw on things that would properly strengthen their jaws and would result in their face shape being correct rather than collapsed.
And this Mew fellow, what's happening with him?
I haven't checked in with him recently, but the last I checked in with him, which might have been just pre-COVID, he was in jeopardy that he was being threatened with having his license eliminated.
But what do they look at when they look at the results? What is their response to all these positive results? They think these people are faking it? They think there's like...
Well, but I mean, to us, this seems crazy.
Yeah.
Right? He's obviously, we can tell you he's telling an evolutionary story that makes sense, and his detractors are telling one that doesn't. And he's got results, but you've got an organization.
The accreditor.
Now I want to look up what all the people that say bad things about him say, other than it's a weird thing to do, and you feel dumb doing this all day.
And those who are preserving the status quo are not on his team. So, what does their actual argument sound like? I don't know. I don't think Bret knows. But we've all seen cases of the status quo telling a story that actually doesn't make sense, but it doesn't matter because they have the power to tell whatever story they want.
So the people that are dishing out braces are very unhappy with his new methods.
Maybe.
Believe me, they're unhappy, and in part, I can't say what their conversations with each other sound like, but if you think about if Mew is right, and it sure looks like he's going to be right, then effectively what he's providing is a mechanism to prevent braces from being needed for almost anybody, right? That's a huge threat to this industry. And I will also tell you, I'm now speaking from personal experience, we are all harmed in many ways by a modern environment that is giving us inputs that don't make any sense. The ability,
but just like we also benefit, right? So
Yes.
as we talk about in the book, like the three greatest successes of Western medicine: antibiotics, vaccines, and surgery. Right? Amazing. Also, all of them used sometimes where they don't have a place. Right? Just to say that, oh, are we living healthier lives in part due to these modern advances? Yes.
Yeah.
Are we also living unhealthier lives in part due to the modernity that we are all being forced into? Yes.
so
Talk about this a lot. Just life has never been easier, which is great. Good times to be alive. Appreciate life, but it's also it's actually causing a lot of other issues along the way. So find the hard things. Go do the hard things. It's gonna make you feel better. It's gonna give you some meaning and maybe fix your jaw.
Questionably, right?
Yeah, unquestionably.
well, both. I mean, you can
Exactly.
see our longevity, our maximum longevity hasn't changed, but our average longevity has gone way up, right? Clearly, we are getting benefits from the modern environment, but we are also paying needless costs, right? So the ability to move teeth in order to get them organized well is actually borrowing, like
It's a
all of our
long-ass
best medical
segment.
tricks, it borrows from an evolutionary system that's already there, right? Vaccination borrows from an immune system that's ready to learn a molecular formula for a pathogen. In the case of teeth, your teeth have the ability to. You will have hit a tooth and felt it loosen, and then it tightens back up.
Sure.
That's because it's sitting in ligaments that actually monitor forces, and when you loosen it, it can tighten back up because your teeth are built to constantly adjust their position, right? As your face shape changes with age, your teeth are readjusting where they're supposed to be. So what
I'm starting to
orthodontists
mew
do is
right
they
now
take
just
advantage
thinking
of
about
this,
this.
and they basically exert forces on the teeth, which cause them to move through the jaw, which is really cool that you can do that, right? So the bone actually breaks down in front of the tooth, and it builds up behind the tooth, and the tooth literally moves horizontally through the jaw, right? That's awesome. Problem is, it's not free. You're borrowing from your lifetime capacity for your teeth to adjust where they are. And in my
And for your
case,
bone to reabsorb and to grow.
right.
Yeah.
So in my case, I had the following awful experience. As a kid, I had orthodontia, and I assumed it was over and done with. And then, as an adult closing in on 50, I started having issues. In fact, I had a tooth shatter. And when I went to the dentist to have this dealt with, they did x-rays, and they said, well, the roots of your teeth are short. And I said, why is that? And they said, probably because your orthodontist moved your teeth too fast, right? And I've lost multiple teeth and had to have implants to replace them. So, this thing that seems so marvelous is actually, it's like a comedy of errors. We had a diet that caused my face shape not to be right, which caused my teeth not to meet up the way they were supposed to, which caused an orthodontist to move them, which caused those teeth to prematurely fail, which then caused me to have to get some new novel technology. What's the consequence of implants? I don't know, but I do know it's tied into all kinds of systems that have implications, right? So,
Among other things, they're not moving with your jaw in the same way that the remaining original teeth are. So, can we avoid that?
This is worth asking about pretty much everything. Is like there's usually an advantage to a lot of modern medicine, but there's always a trade-off. So what are you giving up? What's the downside on this? So that's always a good question, whether you're talking about this or something else.
This? To a large degree, we can. Like some people will need orthodontia for sure, no matter what it is that they eat, no matter how awesome their early developmental period is. But can we limit the kinds of people who have stories like Bret just said? Yeah, we can. So we should. And that's really the lesson, especially of like the early chapters of the book, where we're talking about individuals, we're talking about health and medicine and food and sleep. Like, okay, how is it that we can actually be the healthiest and thus be, for instance, the most resistant to disease, and then go forward and have the best relationships that are the most not just amazing in terms of productivity, but fun and unexpected and full of joy.
which, one of the lessons of the book is it's not like we're saying do what the ancestors did, and it's not like we're saying intervene to fix things. It's a mixture, right? What we should do for children is we should figure out what diet it is that results in healthy face shape so your teeth don't need to be moved, right? So that's a case of restoring something historical in order to get to proper health. On the case of vitamin D, it's actually kind of the opposite. If you live in a place where you're wearing clothing that is going to prevent you from producing vitamin D in sufficient quantities on your skin in exposure to the sun, which is the way it naturally happens, supplementing is a really good idea. And in fact, many cultures have done that, whether they knew that that's what they were doing or not. And
This whole conversation is basically like Robb Wolf meets Dave Asprey. So like go back to your ancestors, live like back in the day, and then like optimize using whatever new tech we have.
in fact, most of them did not.
What were they supplementing with?
Like
Fish oil.
Cod
Yeah.
for the Vikings. Cod liver. Yep.
So, everything in our system that is unhealthy is going to require a mixture of what harm can we just stop doing so that the pathology is not so pronounced, and what interventions are necessary to correct
What I
for
just said,
what
yeah.
harm remains. And the fact is we can be much healthier, and we can live lives that are much less impeded by these things if we recognize, we should be looking for that way of living that minimizes the interventions necessary. It won't be zero, but that minimizes them and allows us to basically not live in conflict with our environment, but live in harmony with it, which is going to require us to alter the environment.
The mewing thing is fascinating.
Still not done with mewing. Okay,
How does one guy figure this out when
you do
we've
this all
been
day.
doing, millions and millions and millions of braces? How many people have gotten braces, and how does this one guy go, I think you just take your tongue. I mean, isn't that is insane? There's so many of these individuals like that throughout human history, where one person goes, I think I have an idea. And then everybody else goes, you're fucking crazy. This is not going to work. This is preposterous. It's not that simple. You're oversimplifying. But it turns out they're correct. And
One of the things about Mew, as Bret said, is that his dad was doing this as well. So Mike Mew was actually second generation, and that the reason I think that's relevant here is that very often those
two generations of
one-off,
people going,
brilliant geniuses who saw things that nobody else could see and were vilified for it had someone or someones, but at least someone who they knew would be totally honest with them and would say sometimes, you know what, I think you're making no sense. I think you're off here. I don't think this is right. And I think you need to sit down and shut up for a little while and rethink this. And who would also say, yep, I know you're being yelled at, and I know the rest of the world appears to think that you're on the wrong track, but walk me through what you're saying. Okay, I'm going to add to that, and I'm going to correct this little thing here, and here we go. I think we can do this. So, the power of partnership, of relationship, is part of what makes humans so unique as well. And I think most of those extraordinary innovators from history and discoverers will have had someone with whom they were actually sharing many deep insights.
Yeah, in fact, Darwin's an interesting one because his grandfather Erasmus really began the logical inquiry that resulted in the origin of species, and they didn't even meet, right? So effectively, Darwin, Charles picked it up from, I believe, Erasmus's journal. But anyway, the point is, yes, it does take time. Some ideas take generations actually to mature. But I will say there's another point in the question you asked about why Mike Mew, right? If you look at the video of him interacting with his colleagues, there's some early video where he began to explain what it was that he understood, what the logical basis of the story was, the evolutionary argument that got my attention. And he is, you've heard Jordan Peterson, among others, talk about disagreeableness. Mike Mew is disagreeable, and I don't mean he's not a nice guy. I really like him as a human being. But you can see in the way he interacts with his colleagues that he is unafraid to say, actually, you have it wrong, right? Now, it happens that the people who dominate these fields will very often be people who were way more diplomatic than that, and that meant that when it was time for them to say, no, you have it wrong, they probably didn't.
Well, and I think, so just to, neither of us are psychologists, as I think you were not, Joe, is that right?
Nope.
So, at considerable risk of getting the actual definition wrong, this question of agreeableness versus disagreeableness that Jordan Peterson talks about is one of these traits in like the Big Five personality trait assessment thing that interestingly has a prediction around sex, that women are much more likely to be high on the agreeableness scale than men are. And as we move farther and farther towards a like agreeableness at all costs, civility, which I think we need to be civil to one another, but often that is a stand-in for if you disagree, that wasn't civil, which is not not what that's supposed to mean. Then we have a breakdown of sense making, frankly, because what that does is it sends all the people who actually do disagree underground, and they're just kind of mumbling to themselves, and they're like in the corner going like, oh, that was a ridiculous meeting I just had to sit through. I didn't agree with any of it, but everyone who spoke up, because it was understood that the only reason to speak, the only conditions on which you should speak is to say rah rah, that presents this sense of consensus, right? It leaves people who didn't speak with the sense of, oh, I guess everyone agrees. And no, like there's so much now that people are agreeing to because they have the sense that everyone else is on board with this. And even though there's something in my brain, I got some spidey sense here thinking this isn't right. Well, if everyone who spoke up said that they agreed, I guess everyone must agree. No. So, we need more disagreeableness. We need more disagreeableness now, and it's being vilified, in part because, male typical ways of doing things are being vilified. And to all of our peril. Science doesn't work with agreeableness, and we won't get good progress that's actually good for everyone if all we have is people agreeing with things that have already been said.
And that's a very dangerous thing if people believe one thing but publicly espouse something else because they're worried about...
I feel like you need to watch videos of this guy. He sounds kind of grumpy, but I might get along with him.
Criticism,
yeah,
or they're worried about being ostracized. We're seeing that a lot today. It's a big issue, and it's also like the difference between agreeableness and disagreeableness with men and women might be the most sexist thing we have in our culture, right? Because women who are disagreeable are like widely hated. Like women who are...
All right, okay, I think we're done here. Real quick, my thoughts. Really interesting to think about mewing from an evolutionary standpoint. Again, just like any other piece of your body, you stress it, you're going to have a reaction to that stressor. It's probably going to grow stronger. So, don't know how that plays out to your face, but I will be doing a little experiment here coming up soon. So, I'll be sharing my real life experience. And if it's a waste of time, then maybe it's a waste of time. But it was cool they mentioned MoveWell. Go check it out, MoveWell.com. If you guys like this video, please like and subscribe. I spent entirely too much time setting up this setup. So if you guys want to see more videos like this, let me know. If you want to see more stuff on mewing, more reaction videos, tell me in the comments what you want to see. I'll be doing a lot more videos here coming up about everything. So thanks for watching. Check out the links below in the video. And I'll drop a link to my mewing video as well here. So, again, thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye.